thanks for having me, Maria. And I think maybe I'll start by just saying what a historic day today is in the 80-year relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States. Um, I just finished listening to President Trump's speech on the future of our relationship with the kingdom and the GCC, and it was one of hope, one of looking forward, not backward, one of, I think, as he said, technology, not terrorism, commerce, not chaos. Uh, he lifted the sanctions on Syria just today to give us a chance to help Syria become a great nation again. These are things that I think are historic in what he perceives to be the vital national interest of the Middle East. Specific to that, though, to your question, is the development of civil nuclear power throughout the kingdom and the Middle East. The time is now. We've seen great success in UAE, and now it's time to help Saudi, Bahrain, Qatar, and any nation in the Middle East that wants to pursue peaceful, safe, and secure nuclear power, that the United States will be their country of choice. And I'm extremely excited about this marriage of tech, AI, with the need for clean, reliable power. And that's the marriage of nuclear power to data and AI. Well, Saudi Arabia has already stepped up in those negotiations between Russia and Ukraine with great leadership, and they will remain a key player in that. The fact that Turkey is hosting potentially a first face-to-face meeting with Zelensky and Putin is only happening because of the meetings that have occurred in Saudi Arabia before this point. And President Trump has urged both sides to meet and discuss a sustainable peace plan. I would not be surprised if President Trump himself doesn't visit Turkey to join this meeting. Well, I think if we look at what he's done in the last 4 months, basically bringing a ceasefire with the Houthis in Yemen from their aggressive activities under the Biden administration, attacking not just Saudi Arabia, but attacking U.S. ships in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. So the Houthis have, to this point, laid down their arms. I think we're going to see something very similar with Hamas and obviously Hezbollah as well. So I believe that when we talk about a binding relationship between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States, it always starts with a security commitment and a security agreement to protect the sovereignty of the kingdom. But I also believe that what President Trump has done with actual action is indicate that he intends to not just say it, but deliver on that promise. Well, I think it's worth noting, Maria, who attended the trip to Saudi Arabia, and they're there in Riyadh now: BlackRock, Tesla, OpenAI, Meta, IBM, Boeing, Qualcomm, Alphabet. These are the leading AI data center companies in the world, and they're all in Saudi Arabia to discuss the future of AI, the future of data, the future of civil nuclear power. And all of these things lead to what President Trump would call an economic entanglement as a strategy and a security measure. The more entangled we become economically, particularly in things that matter to both the kingdom, the GCC, and America, such as data centers and AI and reliable power for the world, clean energy in the form of nuclear, the more we entangle in these types of agreements, the higher likelihood that we will see sustainable peace. But every one of those CEOs are in Riyadh right now, which gives us a clear indication of the vision of the partnership with data and AI in the Middle East. Well, I think, as I think President Trump would say, one step at a time. But the Abraham Accords, which, as you know, really was the hallmark foreign policy decision by President Trump in his previous administration, has been waiting on the sidelines for his return. And now you're seeing these economic deals come forward, not just with the Abraham Accords, but many other bilateral agreements, such as the CISPA between Bahrain and the United States. I believe you're going to see unbelievable commercial engagement over the next 4 years under President Trump's leadership. And he will also, just as he's addressed Syria today, he will address Gaza. He will address Palestine. He will address these issues that the Arab community wants him to address in a rational way, And so I believe you will see every one of these topics discussed, negotiated, and delivered on over his presidency.
First of all, thank you for having me on. I think President Trump's trip to the region, Saudi Arabia and the UAE in particular, after extensive dealings with Israel, show the importance of the region, the excitement and energy in the region, that the region is fundamentally changing. And it also reflects that the one big missing piece of that is the violent um, government that is an incredible malign influence across the region, across the Persian Gulf and Iran. So I think it's a testament to the importance of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and of course our relations with Israel, and that the future is quite near. I believe that Arabs and Jews are already close and working together, and peace breaking out and a new Middle East forming is only hindered by the malign influence of Iran. Look, I've had the privilege of working with many countries, including Saudi Arabia. And I think that Saudi Arabia, as the custodian of the two holy mosques, and with an incredible leadership, a leadership over the last few years that has transformed the country, we are seeing a new era, a new golden age, if you will, of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, where incredible reforms have begun to set in Saudi Arabia. Incredible progress has set in. The country is changing, and that role and that incredible presence that it has is playing out as a leader across not only the region, but of course the Muslim world and the larger world writ large, because of the size of that population, the transformation of that population, and the level of excitement of the changes in that country. Look, I think that the Qataris are not my favorite monarchy in the land. I think that the Qataris have far too long supported Hamas and other extremists, and I think they've tried to play it both ways, and they've tried to use their financial presence in my country and around the world to play it both ways. And I think at some point, if the Qataris want to get past that position, they have to renounce their support for extremist ideology and no longer take that place and change their behavior. They cannot just buy their way into every country in the world while at the same time advocating for extremist groups and groups that I think are not aligned with a peaceful Middle East. I'm not sure. I think that the Abrahamic Accords are a subject that has to be on the tip of every leader's tongue in that region, because the opportunities and the economic, social, cultural, intellectual exchanges that could take place between the Arab and Jewish worlds in Israel are so great, so profound, that it will transform the Middle East in such a way that every responsible leader should have that possibility on the tip of their tongue. So I know President Trump has put a focus on the Abrahamic Accords. It was his administration that accomplished them in the first place. And I'm sure expanding them is long overdue. But for Iran's malign influence and the Muslim Brotherhood's malign influence on Hamas and the Palestinians and what happened on October 7th, I think that we would likely have an Abrahamic Accords that was across the Middle East. But the opponents of peace, the opponents of collaboration and civilization, the radical influences of the Brotherhood and groups like Hamas and their sponsors, in the case of Hamas and Hezbollah, state sponsor like Iran, don't want that to happen. So I think we probably, but for that malign influence and but for the tragedy of October 7th, I think the Abrahamic Accords would be already covering every country or responsible country in the region. Look, I think that the countries in the region, particularly UAE, Oman, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, are so close to the Iranians and have been so subject to the malign influence of the Iranians that they are concerned. Iran knows no checks on its behavior. It has attacked the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Israel with drones and missiles and U.S. troops. It's attacked and killed through proxies U.S. troops at Tower 22 on the Jordan-Syrian border. So that malign influence is there. I think that our friends in that region are very brave, both in the UAE, in KSA, and the Saudis are very brave. But they want to see that America has a policy to confront and oppose Iran, offer a protective shield or an alliance of a shield against Iran's malign influence. Um, they don't feel that they can do it alone. So when the United States shows a consistent, persistent strategy to confront the Iranians, I know that the spirit of those leaders will be for peace and opposition to a malign influence, and that malign influence is Iran. Look, I don't think you can characterize a negotiation is different or not different until you see the outcome of that negotiation. President Trump has made two things clear. He says that these negotiations will not go on forever. He's time limited them at 2 months, and he's made it clear that the typical Iranian tactic of delay, delay, delay will not be acceptable. And he's articulated the Trump doctrine. The Trump doctrine is that Iran must dismantle its nuclear program. There's no reason for them to have a nuclear, industrial nuclear program that has so-called enrichment at any capacity when they are one of the largest hydrocarbon owners in the world. And if they don't dismantle their nuclear program, that the United States and Israel will dismantle it for them, and they will also further be subject to the most devastating sanctions in history. So that doctrine is very, very clear, and I support that doctrine. I think it was the original JCPOA was a mistake, and that no deal is better than a bad deal. Let's face it, the Ayatollah is a sclerotic, corrupt, old leader that has lost the confidence of his people. And there are no logical successors except his son, perhaps, or another hated person. And when you look at the hereditary monarchy that was opposed for so many years, the Ayatollah installing his son as his successor when the Iranian people hate the Ayatollah is a recipe for that country to fall, and it could fall quickly, like what happened in Syria. The Iranian people are a great people. They want freedom, success, and wealth, as President Trump has said, just like anyone else, any other peoples around the world. And what's holding them back is the corrupt, old, oppressive regime of the Ayatollah, the IRGC, and the Quds Force. Look, I think that one of the things that our great friends in the Gulf have to understand is that we are a democracy, and democracies are great things, but they can also be ugly and messy. Meaning that when we have different leaders coming into power, that it appears that we have an inconsistent policy because policies can change with different democratically elected leaders. I believe the great weight of the American people support the position that President Trump has, and that President Biden and even President Obama before him do not reflect the greater weight of the American people. That doesn't mean that there isn't a bipartisan support for this effort, but I think that President Biden, with respect, had it wrong. I think President Trump has it right when it comes to confronting Iran's malign influence. So I believe that our friends in the region must understand that democracies and their leaders change. We don't have monarchies in place where the same policy can last through the same mouth for decades. And that sometimes can lead to messy outcomes.
Well, this is a real opportunity for Syria and for President al-Shara. The U.S. was unsure about Syria after Assad fell. It heard some good things about this government, but it also heard some troubling things about how minorities were being treated and whether the security services were being staffed with foreign fighters. Based on the recommendation of the Saudi Crown Prince, President Trump decided to lift these sanctions to give the Syrian government a chance. And I think to show that it is going to be inclusive, to show that it wants to engage in developing its country, not threatening its neighbors. These are all doable. And I think that President Trump is prepared to work with al-Shara and his government. I mean, this is a country in real trouble. It's a broken country because of what Assad did to it. It doesn't control all of its territory. So I think there really is a need for international aid and a government that can restore order and prosperity. I think so. I think he sees Saudi Arabia as a very influential player because of its oil reserve, because of it has an inspired leadership that I think has desires to promote global stability. And America desperately needs more allies like that. And it was just so gratifying to see the Crown Prince and President Trump working together in a spirit of real, obvious friendship. And I think there's just great potential going forward. Well, there's a problem with Iran because Iran wants a peaceful nuclear program, which it says has to include uranium enrichment. Iran can't be trusted with uranium enrichment at any level because it's been using uranium enrichment to make nuclear weapons fuel. Now, we're talking about peaceful nuclear power for Saudi Arabia. And I think this administration is considering enrichment for Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia is not a nation that has sworn to destroy other nations in the region. It's a peaceful state. It's a state with I think, responsible leadership. And I think that's something the Trump administration is leaning towards doing. I think that President Trump has been speaking with many leaders during this trip on his red lines for an agreement. And it's fairly simple. Iran has to end all elements of its nuclear program with weapons applications. That means it has to stop all uranium enrichment, all of it. There can't be some way of, well, maybe Iran will continue at a low level because it's not dangerous. Low level enrichment is very dangerous. Maybe it would like to cooperate with other states in enriching uranium. Iran has no need to enrich uranium. It can import fuel rods for its nuclear reactor, which it already does. Now, if Iran keeps playing games and refuses to compromise on issues like this, I think Trump will call off the talks and he will implement very, very stiff sanctions against Iran. And there also is a possibility of military action. But I think Trump is going to first move to very stiff economic sanctions and repercussions before he considers military force. Well, the UAE is a member of the Abraham Accords, and that puts the UAE in a special status. And I think that the U.S. will continue to try to build economic and security and defense relationships with members of the Abraham Accords. And I hope Saudi Arabia joins those accords. I hope Qatar joins those accords and other nations in the region. I think it's good for the economies of this region, for the people of this region, and for their mutual defense. Well, President Trump can't run for a third term in 2028. It's barred by our Constitution. I think he likes to joke with his political enemies by telling them that he may run, and he's even made hats saying Trump in 2028. But I can just tell my friends in Saudi Arabia, as much as many of us in the United States would like to see President Trump run again, it is not legally possible. So I wouldn't get your hopes up. Well, I mean, it's sad what happened to America's relationships around the world, including with Saudi Arabia under President Biden. I think it was a foreign policy of incompetence. We didn't treat our friends and allies right. But frankly, President Trump realizes that. He realizes that he has to work extra hard to restore and reinvigorate our key relationships and friendships around the world. And that's why he made his first working foreign level trip to Saudi Arabia, just like he did in 2017. It sends a powerful message.
President Trump's three-country tour has a very special visit in the United Arab Emirates, where the United States and the UAE are building on a deep partnership, a partnership that extends from military and security issues to economic ties to, of course, what I'll call next generation issues, which are now the focus of attention. Artificial intelligence, cooperation in space, the sorts of things that get Elon Musk very excited and why he is a key part of the president's team as part of this trip. I think the personal relationship between the President Trump and the president of the UAE is very strong, and I think we can see this from the visit. But I think the real emphasis is on taking the relationship to the next level on these next generation futuristic investments that are essential to the UAE's strategy for national development and are hugely value added for what the United States is looking in terms of investment from the UAE. So this is a mutually beneficial exchange. Yes, of course, there's important security aspects, but it is much broader than just a traditional security exchange like the old bargain from decades past. So we're seeing a visible display built on from previous administrations, which made huge investments in this sort of relationship, and then taken to a new level by President Trump during this visit to the Emirates. Look, ultimately, I don't believe that mediation is at all a key factor in the outcome of the Iran nuclear negotiations. I don't believe the Qataris play any significant role, regardless of what their spokesman may say. The fundamental decision about the Iran nuclear negotiations is what is the United States demanding? To what extent is the United States taking advantage of the enormous leverage built up through military success, Israel's military success, America's military success, and the amazing display of joint Arab-Israeli military success under American leadership that we saw throughout 2024 in countering Iranian missile strikes against Israel. Are we taking advantage of this leverage to achieve an historic agreement that ends any pathway for Iran to achieve a nuclear weapon? What are we asking? What are we demanding? How are we using our leverage? That's what this negotiation is all about. I'm sorry, but I discount the role of mediators, whether they're the Qataris or anybody else. Thank you. Take care.
Well, the strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia really began to transform in the early parts of this Trump administration as the convener of some very important negotiations, whether it was Russia invasion of Ukraine or the future for Gaza. There were a whole host of very important talks that were conspicuously located in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And so it was proving to be a value-added partner for the United States, but also a convener of very important strategic conversations. This visit, I think, giving the tangible targets and contributions in a massive defense procurement pledge and also significant promises of investment, I think it just cements an enduring foundation for U.S.-Saudi cooperation, one that is mutually beneficial. And so to me, it was the most significant strategic investment in this relationship to date. Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu was an early visitor to the West Wing, and the president and the prime minister know each other going back several years, and they've conducted a lot of business. It is very plausible that it was seen as important to touch base with some other allies in the region. At this moment, there's also sort of the question of security when entering into nearby war zone areas. And so there's, I think, some security considerations, but most likely it was just the anchor of the visit was Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. With Qatar, I am not entirely sure where that agenda builds out, but the United States has longstanding interests and some controversies that the president probably wants to try to manage. Yeah, that I think is another one of those issues where there's really strong politics in the United States that are advocates for moving things in a direction that sees Qatar rising as an anchor kind of ally, and there's a very strong countercurrent in Washington as well. And so there's the controversy related to the representatives of different organizations around the broader Middle East. So I think those are the kinds of questions that perhaps the president wants to speak leader to leader to get a feel for where a more stable and predictable future would be, one that leans more toward the agenda the United States is trying to propose. I think that this is a priority issue for all of the meetings. Obviously, when one looks at the Trump first term, the Abraham Accords was a significant achievement. It would not have been reached but for the leadership and cooperation of allies in the Gulf, especially the leadership of the United Arab Emirates. And so, what the next step of that can and should be is defining where is the United States and where are these major reliable Gulf allies with regard to a different path forward with Iran, a different path forward for Gaza. And so, trying to look over the horizon and prepare. Well, certainly at the leader level, there is an openness and a broad strategic conversation on things that are geopolitical, obviously energy, but also technology and development, investments in each of our countries, but also in third countries that are of strategic importance and value to both of us. And certainly it paints the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in a different light than what most Americans have seen. It, in some ways, I guess, reflects a growing development of the leader of Saudi Arabia being comfortable in his position and having clear ideas about where he wants to invest and drive his country, the region, and the world, and clearly sees the president as a partner in that. Well, I think that is fundamentally behind some of this. In many ways, even our most reliable allies in the Middle East have often said that administrations and presidents come and go, and with them, a lot of uncertainty in the broad direction the United States is going. And so I think the magnitude of the investment that the United States and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are making in each other and in common objectives is building an endurable long-term foundation that hopefully takes some of that uncertainty out of the equation and makes clear that there is a positive value in leaning in the direction that the United States is trying to lead, and it will be respectful of where the leaders in the region want to go as well.
Okay, so President Trump's trip is notable for several reasons. First, he chose to go to Saudi Arabia in the Middle East instead of Europe. This is something that's sending a very strong signal to the Middle East saying that President Trump is going to focus with them more than the Europeans. The Europeans have been a mess. So it's a good thing, I think, that he's gone to Saudi Arabia. Secondly, I don't know if people recognize this. This is a mirror image of what he did during his first term. He actually did a summit with Saudi Arabia in May of 2017. It was notable again then that he chose the Middle East to go and make the investment of time. And that I think bodes very well for what he's doing now. With Saudi Arabia, it's all about deals and money. I think there's going to be a number of significant agreements that come out of this, to include some framework for a revision and enhancement of the Abraham Accords. One of the things that was necessary and did not fully happen is Saudi Arabia had to become a full partner in the Abraham Accords. Didn't happen in the first term. I think it's going to happen now. Regarding Qatar, it's one of the things which most benefited Qatar is that they assisted with the return of one of the hostages being held by Hamas. They were the go-betweens and the bridge between Hamas and the United States. This upset the Israelis, but it resulted in the live return of an American citizen from Hamas. So I think this was a good thing. And I think the big issue with Qatar is its relationship with Iran. There have been issues over the years regarding Qatar being essentially a partner with Iran on a number of issues. And plus, there's been other things. Qatar's support for the Brookings Institution, which is not a think tank that supports President Trump, and things like that. So I'd like to believe that President Trump visiting with Qatar is going to result in a good relationship where things become more regularized. UAE, I think, is another location where we're talking about great economic partnerships, good potential for them being a key member of a revised Abraham Accord, and of course, just the idea of them having a strong relationship with us, as they do, as a partner with all things we do in the Gulf and the Red Sea and at that area. All this is very important. Regarding Syria, this is where those nations I just mentioned can be very helpful, because right now, Syria, the new government of Syria, is asking for sanction relief and regularized relationships. So it's not really our job. It's not the U.S.'s job. It really is up to the regional powers to work on resolving that. So I think, as much as anything, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar can be helpful with Syria in trying to regularize that. So I think that's what President Trump's trying to do, is trying to make positive connections between nations, helping to enhance their ability to do their job. It's not our job to help resolve conflicts in the Middle East. We want to be there to be helpful. President Trump wants to be helpful, but I think he wants to enable those who live in a region to take the lead and do the things which are necessary to bring stability, commerce, and regularized diplomatic relationships. Sure. So part of the challenge of the Middle East is, what do they have besides oil? And not a lot. I've been to delegations in Egypt. Egypt has an amazing, intelligent population that doesn't have a lot to do. So why not work with Arab nations to create a Silicon Valley of their own? There's no reason not to do it. And I think there's a lot of investment potential. And again, this is why President Trump went to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE before he went to Europe. I think he sees the future regarding commerce, regarding production. We all know that Taiwan is the primary producer of chips right now. Something like 80% of all chips that go into cars, something like 25% of all super advanced chips. Why? We can do it in partnership with Middle Eastern countries. I think that's what President Trump wants to do. This is a great potential to make the Middle East a technology center, and to give them great commerce and growth. And I think that's what's going to happen with President Trump working to bring that to make that real in the Middle East.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. I think we have to remember that what President Trump says as a candidate, as a private citizen, and as a president, he keeps those promises. If you look towards the campaign in 2015, himself as a private citizen in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s, president, the first term and now president, the second term, he's made his foreign policy goals and his economic policy goals extremely clear for both the American audience and the global audience. We have to look at the facts. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's first foreign policy trip wasn't to Asia, it wasn't to Middle East, it wasn't to the African continent, it was in Latin America. And people ask, why was Secretary of State Marco Rubio's first trip in Latin America? Why is President Trump's first foreign policy trip to the Middle East instead of to Europe, or even, if you want, Israel in the Middle East? It's because President Trump has made securing the United States in the Western Hemisphere from a security and an economic point of view extremely important. And by doing so, the United States has to safeguard its own backyard. That's why Secretary of State Marco Rubio went to Latin America. And President Trump is now going to the Middle East, to our Gulf allies, which Saudi Arabia, of course, is a massive partner and strategic ally of the United States. It's for two reasons. The first is, of course, security, building on the Abraham Accords, and preventing a conflagration which has begun ever since the Israelis and Hamas have gone to war, the burgeoning potential for nuclear conflagration with Iran, and also economically, the Gulf states have been primary participants in foreign direct investment into the United States markets to the tune of hundreds of billions and potentially trillions of dollars over the next 10 years. This is the logic behind both the Latin America trip of Rubio and President Trump's first foreign policy trip to the Middle East. And he's been on point since he was a private citizen and as a candidate that he seeks to put American citizens first economically and from a security point of view. And this trip does exactly that. We have to look at the difference between his first term and this current term. The world has changed a lot since 2016, 2017, when President Trump first was president, and of course, when he first traveled to the Middle East. Back then, in his first term, there was a lot more hostility between the GCC, Saudi Arabia, and other countries with Iran. There was an issue with the Iran nuclear agreement that the Obama administration had signed that President Trump decided to get out of. And war with Iran was looking more likely than ever, especially after the assassination of General Soleimani and the various proxies that Iran had financed and funded throughout the Middle East that were attacking American military personnel. Moving forward in the current situation that we find ourselves in upon this trip that President Trump will be on in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE are warming their relations with Iran. There seems to be detente growing. Iran and the Houthis have come to a stalemate, with the United States ending the hostilities with the Houthis, which of course Iran is backing. You've seen Hezbollah completely crippled and dismantled basically in Lebanon, another massive proxy of Iran. And of course in Syria, you have the Turks filling the power vacuum along with the Russians, with the new leadership in Syria that has actually curtailed the Iranian influence. So Iran at this point is stepping back and is more insulated, is warming its ties with the GCC. It seeks to come to the negotiating table, the Trump administration. And I think this trip to the Middle East will try to bring this to fruition so that the United States does not embark on another military conflict in the Middle East once again with Iran, especially if the United States can use diplomacy instead of war. These are massive investments. The United States now is seeking to rebalance the global trade and finance architecture and to repatriate industries back to the United States and to attract foreign direct investment and to renegotiate trade deals. This is all happening simultaneously with the tax cut proposals that Trump is trying to push forward in Congress and securing the Western Hemisphere, which the United States is part of. I think that the president has already earned pledges from the GCC to the tune of $400 billion to $1 trillion over the next 5 to 10 years. The United States obviously is a strategic partner of the GCC, and in the United States' interest, it is to prevent any spillover of this war that has begun via Yemen with the Houthis, Iran becoming a nuclear power, and the GCC becoming destabilized. So as long as the United States can coalesce our GCC partners using both economic deals and military prowess, we will have a more stable Middle East. It will allow the GCC to invest in the United States. The GCC will buy more armaments from the United States. Saudi Arabia might become a nuclear partner of the United States without having to recognize Israel or be part of the Abraham Accords, even though this is in the United States' interest. This all bodes extremely well for this partnership that the United States has with the GCC, and it's incredibly important as the United States seeks to wean off of China and other foreign governments in terms of trade and foreign direct investment. This will be a win-win for both the GCC and the United States.
President Trump's visit to the Arabian Gulf stands as a reminder that the United States is not going to let the region fall into China's sphere of influence, and that or that of the Russians, without American involvement. I mean, the over $1 trillion investment deals that the president racked up with the UAE, not to mention the others with neighboring nations, shows that President Trump sees the region as essential to American prosperity and to American security. In the last administration, Joe Biden decided to leave the region alone and to allow China and Russia to become dominant in the area. Now, under President Trump, the United States has returned to its traditional role as both a guarantor of security in the region as well as an economic force. With the UAE's focus on artificial intelligence and other economic investment opportunities, the president is showing that the United States is open for business for Emirati companies and Emirati investments, and also for the American support for the Emirates and its security faced by Iran and other organizations that threaten the security of the Emirates in the region. Well, I think that in terms of domestic impact inside the United States, I don't think it will have much impact because Americans are focused more broadly in the Western Hemisphere. However, I think that it will have an amazing impact in the Arabian Gulf region because it's showing that President Trump values the United Arab Emirates and the other nations and wants to have a relationship with them. The threat is related to Iran and the competition between the United States and China and lesser extent Russia, which have been increasing their investments in the UAE, Saudi, Qatar, and other nations in the region. So it's just a reminder that the United States is not leaving, and the United States wants to be competitive with these other newcomers.
As someone who's British, we're not very happy with our Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and I think a lot of us in Britain are actually looking for leadership from Donald Trump and JD Vance when it comes to world affairs and even some of our internal affairs. Well, I have to say that Donald Trump's visit to the Middle East is going to be particularly welcome. I believe next on his list, I believe he's now in the United Arab Emirates at the moment, and I really think it really is a chance to sort of fuse relationships between the UAE and America, particularly as the UAE has put a lot of work into diplomacy behind the scenes, whether it's sort of reaching some entente cordiale with Iran, or whether it's a case of the release of the 175 prisoners in the Russia-Ukraine area. One thing that does slightly worry me about the meeting from Donald Trump's point of view is Syria and Al Jaloni and Mohammed Al Jaloni, the leader, where they're looking to restore relationships with the guy who's up until now has been a prescribed terrorist. Now, whatever you want to call it, whether it's sort of mopping up the ends of the Assad regime, or whether, as many people call it, it's described as ethnic cleansing. Certainly that I've interviewed Christians and Alawites over in Syria. One story is I interviewed a lady in the west of Syria, and the Al Jalai's HTS came in, and they basically we're looking to see if they were part of Assad's army, and then after they were satisfied as they weren't, they then went away and took all their possessions. Another lot came back the next day, and basically, as they had no money or possessions, shot three people dead in cold blood in the middle of the street. I think, to my mind, I think it's a little bit too early at the moment for Donald Trump to be lifting sanctions in this situation. But moving on from that, I think there is much to commend what Donald Trump's up to. I think there has been whispers that of persuading Saudi Arabia to sign the Abraham Accords. My understanding is from via a Bahraini diplomat that Bahrain would never sign the Abraham Accords if it wasn't with a lot of approval from Saudi Arabia. I think Donald Trump and UAE and everybody else involved in the Middle East have a fantastic opportunity at the moment to bring peace about and return the Middle East. What I, in my opinion, could be basically the Singapore, a major new economic and technical hub in the world, which I'm sure we're all going to benefit from. So, if you look at some of the trade deals that Donald Trump is doing at the moment, they look fantastic with Qatar, selling the Boeing 747s, and also I believe Saudi Arabia will be investing $600 billion dollars in America in high tech and AI technology. So that's got to be welcome as well. So I think my key what's going on in the Middle East at the moment is that the terrorism has to be nipped in the bud. I've been particularly impressed with the UAE's approach to terrorism. There's a guy called Amjad Tahar who came over to Britain, and he said there were more terrorists in Britain and Europe than there are in the Middle East. So, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Britain have infiltrated many of the institutions in this country: the police, the judiciary, the civil service, and also politicians as well. There are 5 MPs, 4 of them Muslim, who stood purely on a ticket of wanting to get Israel out of Gaza. So they're absolutely dreadful at the moment. So the most important thing is Hezbollah and Hamas need to be dealt with. The situation whereby they can never be a problem in the Middle East ever again. Obviously, that includes Israel at the moment, and I think Israel as well could be part of the solution longer term for the Middle East. It's innovation, it's science, it's education. It has to be welcome, and also with the Dubai's banking and finance infrastructure, you have a basis there for a more prosperous, happier, and peaceful world. So I wish everybody in there good luck. But the only fly in the ointment is I think America's been far too quick to recognise Al Jaloni, who I look upon as a Al Qaeda oriented terrorist. So yeah, but the information that's coming out of the Middle East isn't in depth at the moment. It's all kind of we believe and we hope and things like that. But whatever happens, let's hope everything gets off to a great start. Let's hope we have a springboard for the future, and I wish everybody very well.
So, Maria, I think it's clear that President Trump's objectives for this trip, which includes, of course, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, is primarily economic. And it is trying to build a stronger strategic tie between these countries, to include the UAE, with the United States when it comes to investments inside the United States and cooperative agreements when it comes to expanding U.S. Economic interests around the world. Now, inside of that is likely going to be national security and defense, which includes arms deals. I'm biased, of course, but the United States, I think, is clearly manufactures the highest when it comes to military equipment, aircraft, vessels, air and missile defense. They have the highest, I think, significance when it comes to technology and their advancements. And I think this will also be included in any agreement between the United States and the United Arab Emirates. Yes, I think the UAE was pivotal in the success of the Abraham Accords in the first Trump administration, and that's likely going to be a topic of discussion in this trip, both because they have already done that and because their participation and outreach could help expand it, which President Trump clearly wants to see done. That could have an influence on Saudi Arabia and other countries joining this accord. And I think the UAE's could be pivotal when it comes to this expansion. Well, I do think other international, I should say, topics will come up. Obviously, there's a big consideration when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine and potentially entering a new nuclear agreement between the United States and Iran. The UAE's played pivotal roles in the past when it comes to diplomatic efforts, and I think they can in the future. Obviously, that'll be something they'll have to make a decision whether to be involved, but I do believe President Trump will be looking to see what they're interested and willing to do.
Yes, with meeting with the United Arab Emirates, Trump is probably, I would assume that he's going to be looking for the same type of outcomes that he had with Mohammed bin Salman and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where he's going to, one, look to strengthen economic ties, also strengthen ties related to the military and security. This comes at the same time, though, where Trump is making these same type of agreements with Qatar, which is very interesting because Qatar does not play well with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And even yesterday, during his speech in Doha, Trump made the statement that Al Thani and Mohammed bin Salman seem like they're great friends. Well, the truth is they're not. They don't like each other at all. There's disdain going both ways. So my hope is that, and this is my hope, that the Trump administration would put a great amount of emphasis in strengthening the ties with the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and trying to peel away from Qatar. But we can see that's clearly not happening from the fact that he's been gifted an airplane, Air Force One, by the Qatari government. Whether it is the economic packages saying that Qatar is the military packages, the defense and security packages that he's signing with Qatar are the same type of deals that he's making with the UAE and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the thing is with Qatar, I think in the back of my mind, he believes that he can somehow, money will override ideology and he can peel Qatar away from the Islamic Republic of Iran and use this during the nuclear negotiations. I think this is a foolhardy strategy. He somehow believes that money can override ideology. And this is a classic mirror imaging error that the United States has been making. The United States needs to work with the United Arab Emirates. They have been the only country that has stayed in the fight against the Houthis and kept that country from falling into to the Houthis by supporting the STC, or the Southern Transitional Council, to the south. That protects a pocket around Aden. So the UAE has been very critical in making sure that the Islamic Republic and its proxies have not steamrolled through the region. So these defense and security alliances are important, especially with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and to get UAE and Saudis working together on the same page to form some type of collective deterrence against the bad actors in the region. That's what's really needed. That's what Trump should be putting all his emphasis towards, that instead of Qatar. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of grand statements, a lot of lucrative deals, and acting as if Qatar is a benign, benevolent actor in the region and can bring peace and stability, when really he needs to be looking at the Gulf countries. He needs to look at the UAE and Saudi. They're the ones that are looking for peace in the region, not Qatar, not the Islamic Republic, and certainly not them. And
so Qatar is looking forward to President Trump's visit, probably more than the other three Gulf states. Recall that in Trump's first term, he went to Riyadh. They had the golden shining orb moment. And as soon as he left, Trump basically agreed with the parties that wanted to blockade Qatar. That blockade was viewed within Qatar as an existential threat. The fact that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, fortunately for Qatar, had extensive experience there, was able to moderate the effects on that. That that was very important for Qatar's survival. I think they realized from that point going forward that Qatar needed to have good relations with the United States, and even relations at an elevated level than the other countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council. So the question is, what does the United States want from Qatar, and what does Qatar want from the United States? In terms of security, our relations are robust. There is friction over the role of Qatar as a vocal supporter of Hamas. That is just reflects really public opinion in the Qatari population and much of the Arab world. Qatar has provided financial support for various Palestinian groups, to include the Palestinian groups which run the Gaza Strip. That has found its way into Hamas's pockets, but they do this at the request of Israel and the United States with the full knowledge of the United States. Qatar has also been criticized by some of the United States for hosting the Taliban prior to their takeover of Afghanistan. But again, this was done at the request of the United States so that we would have somebody to negotiate with. So Qatar has proven itself, not afraid to take on difficult tasks at our beckoning, and has been criticized for it. I think what they will want, first off, is a full-throated voice of support from the President of the United States, acknowledging the role that Qatar's played on behalf of the United States and its partner Israel in doing some of the difficult things and putting out significant money in order to advance what the United States and sometimes Israel wants to have done. The second thing they want is they want to deepen the security ties with the United States so that Qatar will not be threatened by its neighbors. And those are the neighbors across the Gulf, Iran, but also and more immediately the other members of the Gulf Cooperation Council, particularly Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. I think that Qatar's approach to that is to purchase a lot of U.S. equipment, military equipment as well as civilian equipment. There might be the awarding of civilian airline contracts. I think there will be some weapon sales announced. And then I think Qatar will also possibly announce upgrade to El Udeid Air Base, which has a large number of American forces and is also the heaviest runway in the region. It's the only runway in the GCC that can handle a fully loaded B-52. So I think that they will announce some improvements there to make the U.S. presence in Qatar more lasting. They view that as sort of an insurance policy against foreign adventurism. And then I think that there will be the announcement of some Qatari investment in the United States. That, again, is part of both yields profits and natural dividends. There's an outside chance that there will be some cultural advancement. Qatar has a system of museums, a network of museums, and they're working on developing more. There are persistent rumors that a modern art museum is in the offing, particularly with mid-century American modern painting. And I think that a presidential visit would be a good time to announce that, but haven't heard anything on that. That's mostly whispers in the art community. Either way, I think it will be a big moment for a historically small state that punches above its weight, and a deepening of ties with their most important partner, the United States. Yeah, so I think that there has been some misstatements of what's going on with the Qatari offer of a used Boeing 747 to be converted into Air Force One. It's portrayed by some in the media as though this is a personal gift to President Trump, something that he would pocket and take with him when he left the White House. But the airplane will be transferred to the United States government and used in lieu of a declining existing 747. Boeing has been trying to develop a new Air Force One for quite some time, and for some reason it's taken longer. They're not making new 747s, so if they're going to use that airframe, they have to use an existing one. This has the benefit of being an airframe that has the developed interiors. It would require specific pretty expensive work to configure it for Air Force One. It would need the installation of significant communications assets and also force protection assets. And the interior would have to be combed over to look for listening devices or safety issues. But President Trump, will not personally benefit from this. It's not something that he'd take from him. It will go to the U.S. Air Force, and then when they're done with it, presumably the rumor is it would be retired to the Trump Presidential Library, which is under the auspices of the National Archives. There is precedent for this. There's an Air Force One that's at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in California. It's not as though Ronald Reagan left the White House and then was flying around in that airplane. So why has this had traction? Well, there are a lot of people who really dislike President Trump, and he does have a reputation, as a deal maker. The downside of that is a reputation for being avaricious, which his detractors in the media, and there are many of them, have been eagerly amplifying. But at the end of the day, I think this is more about developing a U.S. government capacity. There does need to be a presidential airplane in an efficacious manner. And I think it's an appreciated offer from the Qataris, but it may be politically difficult to seize on this. I mean, already we've heard that Senator Schumer has announced a hold on judicial nominees until this is explained to him. I think this is being blown out of proportion from what it really is. Well, I don't think the Brookings Institute would state that because they receive support from Qatar, they would say that they maintain their electoral or their editorial independence. And I think that that's common. Look, people who work at think tanks, people who work in the media, really, really, really generally don't like Donald Trump. And it is frustrating to them to see that President Trump has, put a few wins on the board. There is a significant part of people in the United States, and generally they're more educated people, the kind of people who'd work at think tanks or work in the media, who think that Trump is just unsuited to be president by temperament, by history, by the fact that he has active business interests. We haven't had a businessman as president. So I think this story and the narrative that is used to advance this story reflects that sort of distaste for Trump, which is, we've been seeing for about 10 years now.
Well, President Trump came to the Middle East and came to Saudi Arabia with a new vision. He's presenting himself as a man of peace. He already achieved 4 or 5 major breakthroughs in making peace and making stability in the world. He was able to make a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, able to put together a negotiation process between Ukraine and Russia, able to stop the Houthi, able to really move ahead with the negotiation with Iran, and he's open to really do something useful and new, and pursuing peace and security in the Middle East. His vision is based on 2 things: peace and stability, and also economic development and progress. These are the same corners of the vision of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He is also committed to the development of Saudi Arabia and development of the region, and he is committed to stability and security for the region and peace. As a result of that, I think this visit will connect very well, not only in terms of exchange of trade and investment, but also in terms of building a common understanding between the 2 leaders and between Donald Trump and the leaders of the Gulf and of the Arab world at large. I think in his meetings and in his speech, which was long, in the investment conference, he basically summarized this vision. And he identified the fact that he feels very strongly that cooperation with Prince Mohammed bin Salman and with Saudi Arabia and with the Gulf states will be a cornerstone in his policy to really move on and to contain the issues in the Middle East and to develop more or less based for economic development in the region. Now, let me identify the main point that, people say that, Donald Trump has only an economic interest. Well, if the economic interest materialize, if you put together a base for economic development in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, then the economic base by itself, if you have all these giants of Apple and of other companies in the artificial intelligence and other things coming to Saudi Arabia, by itself needs to have stability around it. So building economic base means building also a peace and stability. Now, President Trump comes to the Middle East not only with this vision of peace, but also he comes with a situation where there is a big gulf between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the right wing of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. This gulf is widening. And it's quite clear that, if an American president for the first time comes to the Middle East and does not visit Israel, that there is something going on to tell you that, the policy of the United States and the policy of Israel are not really going parallel to each other. There is a big gap between them. That is the result of the fact that, America's interest was in the fact that, they needed to have a ceasefire and to move on in the negotiation. And America did its best to negotiate and to move on. The negotiation with Hamas, the negotiation with the Israelis, and so on, and asking also the mediators, Egypt and Qatar, to move on. In spite of that, the ceasefire did not come. This is a feeling that, President Trump feels that, nothing he requested was really implemented from the Israeli side. So I think this gap by itself reveals a lot. And the fact that, he has trust in Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and trust in the Emirates and in Qatar, that means that, there is a shift in the American foreign policy and an American commitment to the Middle East. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
President Donald Trump's upcoming visit to the Gulf region, specifically Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, represents a pivotal moment for American foreign policy and the future of the Middle East. The expectations are high, and the stakes are even higher. President Trump's return to the region signals a renewed U.S. commitment to its Gulf allies. He brings a message of strength, clarity, and zero tolerance for aggression by the mullahs or their proxies. These relationships are not transactional. They're built on decades of shared interests and deep historic ties. This visit is about reestablishing those ties as a foundation for a new regional order. Leaders in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi understand that the president treats them not as clients but as partners. His agenda will likely include defense cooperation, civilian nuclear power, economic development, and a unified stance against terrorism and destabilization. In Saudi Arabia, President Trump is expected to encourage the kingdom to return to its path of normalization with Israel, a process that had been months away from fruition before the October 7 attack. Of particular note is the presence of the presidents of the Palestinian Authority, Lebanon, and Syria in Riyadh, along with other unnamed guests. This could open the door to an unprecedented Arab consensus in pursuit of regional stability, economic integration, and a final rejection of mullah-backed chaos. If successful, the Middle East will look very different within a year. For decades, the UAE has stood as one of America's most reliable allies in the Middle East, hosting U.S. military assets, supporting counterterrorism operations, and championing economic modernization. This relationship has flourished under the UAE's visionary leadership, from the late Sheikh Zayed to today's president, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, who has positioned the UAE as a beacon of progress, tolerance, and innovation, not only in the Arab world, but globally. Whether through the groundbreaking Abraham Accords, investment in clean energy, or its rapid technological advancement, the UAE has consistently demonstrated bold leadership and an unwavering commitment to a peaceful and prosperous future, values that align closely with American ideals. Qatar hosts the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East, home to over 10,000 U.S. troops. Qatar has entirely funded the construction and ongoing operations of the base. That level of support underscores the paradox. While Qatar is a critical U.S. military partner, it has been accused of providing political and financial shelter to Hamas and disseminating extremist ideology through Al Jazeera. This duality is no longer tenable in a region moving toward clarity and alignment. Qatar can remain a valuable regional player, but only if it aligns decisively with the forces of peace and stability. The days of playing both sides must end. This visit is not symbolic, it's strategic. President Trump arrives as Hezbollah is obliterated, the mullahs have been kicked out of Lebanon and Syria, the Houthis are on the verge of collapse, and the mullahs have been severely weakened. This is a chance to reinforce alliances, expand the Abraham Accords, and isolate those who still choose violence over vision. With the participation of the Palestinian Authority, Lebanon, Syria, and unnamed others in the Riyadh talks, we may be seeing the beginning of something extraordinary. For the Gulf, for Israel, and for the U.S., this is an opportunity to build a new Middle East, one based on strength, sovereignty, and shared progress. The time for half measures is over. The time for alignment has arrived. Thank you.
I think President Trump is traveling to the Gulf in order to really, because he sees that Gulf as a real economic powerhouse. And so I think that this visit is all about business. And it's trying to invest in the future of the Gulf and to try and, really develop business opportunities for the United States. And try to connect our Arab partners like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and others in the U.S. economic and security framework that we see. So I think that that's the primary reason here. And also, President Trump has a long-time aspiration to expand the Abraham Accords. Obviously, UAE is already a part of the Abraham Accords, but having Saudi Arabia join the Abraham Accords would be a very, very big political game changer in the region and would be a win for U.S. interests. I think it would be a win for Saudi interests, and I think it would be a win for the interests of our other allies and partners throughout the region. So having those kinds of frameworks in mind is what's motivating President Trump in this trip. And I think that he visited Saudi Arabia as his first trip during his first term. And I think that that just is continues the focus and the priority that he places on U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia. Well, I'm not sure what announcement he has to make there. I think it might have to be economic in nature, but we'll have to see what happens in the coming days. I think there's been a lot of speculation as to what kind of announcement he has in mind. There have been some people who thought that it has to do with the creation of a Palestinian state, although I sincerely doubt that. And some Trump administration officials have denied that that's the case. Some analysts have speculated that the Saudis might try to host a meeting between President Trump and President Pezeshkian of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Again, I find that highly unlikely because the Iranians are afraid to even meet or portray themselves publicly as meeting directly with U.S. diplomats in Oman and Rome. So to go from that risk aversion to a presidential level meeting in Saudi Arabia would be a real stretch in my view. So those are just some prospects. And in terms of U.S. Sanctions on Syria, I think that there are some Gulf partners that are pushing the United States to lift the sanctions because they view the changes and the ouster of the Assad regime in Syria as an opportunity to bring Syria back into the Arab fold after a long period of time where the Assad regime was allied with the Iranians and Hezbollah. So I think that that's part of the motivation here. But, the United States has to see changes from the Syrian government. And given the history of the new government and its leadership, I think that caution is in order. Hope to see you too. Good luck. Thank you.
I'm in Washington, D.C. again to visit the Kennedy Center They have a very special event going on tonight. And also this morning, I was invited by the Flynn family to attend the Canyon Caucus Room. They had something about the CNPP that China is doing, and to prevent how we can prevent for the safety and also what's going on in Pacific Rim. So it was very important testimony that General Flynn gave, and Secretary. So they were there, and I was very intuitive, and the knowledge that they share was very important, and it's very critical to open the eyes to the Congress. And they knew what's going on in Taiwan and Korea, also Japan and Australia, and how those 4 countries are so important to U.S. economy. And so they have shared a lot of good information, and hopefully that will bring in this critical moment that we can solve the issues that we have here. It was magnificent to meet with Maria Malouf, the Capital Institute. She has shared very important news about what's going on in Saudi Arabia and UAE. And so I have learned so much more about what's going on.